Hi YouTube, this is Jonathan and the piano lesson. So this is the place to come if you really want to learn music. Okay, I don't really teach songs per se. What I do try to give you guys is what we might call the keys to the kingdom. Okay, this is the place where we have some serious talks about actual music. Okay, I'm not talking about music. I'm talking going in depth into what makes music music, the language of music. You might call it the linguistics of music, okay? Because music is a language. And I want to talk to you about a favorite subject of mine, tetrachords, and some unusual tetrachords, and why they're kind of going to blow your mind, and explain why it's so easy to get confused about music. And because I really want to make learning music easy for everybody. But you have to understand the grammar of music, and you also have to understand that the language of music has limitations. And we do our best to try to explain music and write music in ways that are understandable, but because of the system of music that we have and equal temperament, which I'm not going to go into right now, but the way music is organized, it's a bit of a deal with the devil, okay? What I mean is that on the piano, you can spell notes in more than one way. You can spell them as sharps or flats, even though it's the same key, and that kind of confuses people. You know, why is an F sharp and a G flat the same key on the piano? You know, why do they have two names? Well, they're really not the same note, and I'm going to try to explain some of that. So let me move on. When we're learning a language, we're trying to make the music meaningful. Again, meaningful and manageable. Those are the two things. So if you have an 8-note scale, it's much easier to learn 4 notes than it is to learn 8 notes. And it's easier to learn patterns, to look at the underlying structure of the music, rather than just simply regurgitating the letter names of the notes and learning mechanically and by rote. So just as a quick review, okay, I'm going to talk about the typical tetrachord that we come across. A tetrachord, T-E-T-R-A-C-H-O-R-D. It's a group of 4 notes, and of course our ubiquitous C major scale, okay, are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay, those are the tetrachords. Those are the 2 tetrachord groups, and they're similar because you have a half step in the same place, whole, half, whole, half. And for those folks that aren't acquainted with whole steps and half steps, we can look that up. A half step being the very next key on the piano, okay, and a whole step being 2 half steps. But C, D, E, F, and G, A, B, C share the same underlying structure. And those tetrachords, the tetrachords are, the word is B-O-U-N-D. They're bound by a perfect fourth. So fourth being the distance from C to F, that's a fourth, okay? And there's different kinds of fourths, different kinds of intervals, I-N-T-E-R-V-A-L-S, and different kinds of intervals, but perfect intervals are the ones we start with. Those are the most important. And because they're kind of butting against one another, we're going to refer to those as disjunct. Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, and we learn tetrachords because this C scale actually contains C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. The first half of this scale is the last 4 notes of the F scale, and the last 4 notes of the C scale is the first 4 notes of the G scale. All right. So that's typically what we're up against. Okay. Now, if you take that same scale, all right, and you let's say, I'm going to write that out just in block letters, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay, if we take these groupings, there's a tetrachord, okay, and there's a tetrachord, and there's a tetrachord. So C to F, D to G, E to A, F to B, all right, G to C, A to D, B to E, and then we're back to C to F again, okay? Not all of those fourths are the same. That's a perfect fourth, right? And that's a perfect fourth, right? And that's a perfect fourth, right? And this, F to B, is not a perfect fourth, all right? It's what we might call an augmented fourth, all right? Perfect fourth would be F to B flat, right? And then we have G to A, that's a perfect fourth, and A to A to D, that's a perfect, sorry about that, that's a perfect fourth, and B to E is a perfect fourth. All right, those are all perfect fourths. All right. So as we go up the scale, this is the outlier. All right. Let's kind of isolate that for a minute. F, G, A, B. All right. F, G, A, B. F, G, A, B natural. F, G, A, B. All of these are equidistant. They're all whole steps. All right, they're all whole steps. And the distance from F to B, we said, was an augmented fourth. It could also be what we call a tritone, Tritone. That's really important if you're going to learn jazz. And a tritone meaning three whole steps, okay? Those are three whole steps in a distance. And if you make a scale, that kind of tetrachord group there, okay, which is atypical, plus the more typical group of C, D, E, F, all right, that's the more typical group. That group, C, D, E, F, all right, that's your perfect fourth. That scale there is what we call a Lydia and a Lydian mode, M-O-D-E. A mode just meaning that we're taking the notes of one scale and kind of reframing them as we go. This sound, right, that fourth note in relation to the F major scale is a sharp 4, okay? That's the raised fourth. So if you want to create a Lydian scale, you can take any conventional perfect fourth and raise it a half step, and now you have this whole tone sound, okay? Now, let's extend that idea for a minute, okay? And we're going to, typically when we think of a scale, we think of a scale, an F scale begins on a note on the same letter that it ends on. So an F scale starts on an F and ends on an F. Typically we think of the scale as bound by an octave, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, all right? We think of those scales, all right? And if you're going, there are other scales to learn. There are typically the scales that we learn, the Lydian that we learn is asymmetrical, all right? It's asymmetrical because the distances, the intervals between the notes change. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, right? They're different when we get to the half. But there are symmetrical scales, and the first symmetrical scale we'll talk about is the whole tone scale. And here's where the grammar and spelling and music come into play. So there's our groupings of 4 notes, okay? And we can spell this F, G, A, B, okay? Now, any scale, keep in mind, any scale, for the most part, we're talking about steps, all right? We're talking about the next letter in the alphabet, the very next letter in the alphabet. So what's the next letter in the alphabet after B? Well, it's C, okay? But C natural is not a whole step. We want a scale that has all whole steps. So we have to make that into a sharp, okay? C sharp. And then the next note, well, we have to make that into a sharp, that's D sharp, all right? And then then if we're going alphabetically, right? Well, the next letter after D, after C sharp and D sharp, well, that would be E sharp. There is such a thing as E sharp. Well, I just told you that a scale is typically bound. It's typically bound by an octave. F starts on F and ends on F. So what the heck is going on here? If I can call E sharp and F are the same key on the piano, right? Is that interval actually an octave? Well, no, it's really not anymore an octave, right? It's a seventh. It's an augmented seventh, but it's not an octave. So if I want to end on the F, I could kind of go backwards, but that from F up to E in general, we'll just say in general, is a seventh, okay? If I want to go the other way, so F, stepping down to we'll get rid of the E sharp, okay, and F, E flat, D flat, and this would be called C flat, which is the same C flat, D flat, E flat, F, which is the same note as B. B and C flat are the same note on the piano. So here's F, E flat, D flat, C flat, which is the same as B, and then B, A, G, F. In other words, if we're going to make a scale, a typical scale that's bound within an octave, we got a problem. We got this tritone problem, okay? And that's kind of where music blows up, okay? Our notation system, can be confusing. So the first step is to realize that the system has limitations. The second step is to realize that when you're learning music, you have to learn it in small chunks, and whether or not I call this a B or C flat is going to have to do with the context of a larger issue, what we're doing within music itself. But this scale would be called a conjunct, a conjunct scale in a sense, because they share the same key. This grouping of notes, this tetrachord, okay, this group of 4 notes is sharing a group of notes right there. So the whole tone scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 notes essentially, or 7, but it could be thought of as a 2 conjunct tetrachords. Now, and let's just kind of back up for a second and talk about vocabulary a little bit. So you have perfect intervals. The perfect intervals are fourths, fifths, and octaves. Okay, so an octave, C to C, C to G, that's a fifth, and if you invert that, that's the fourth. And a unison is a perfect octave. Okay, the key on the piano is actually more than one string vibrating, so that's referred to as a unison. 2 trumpet players playing the same note as a unison. Those are the perfect intervals. Now, if you take a perfect interval and you lower it half step, it becomes diminished, right? And whether it's a fourth or a fifth, right? And that's just how it works, okay? If you have within the scale here, you can have major, typically you have either perfect or major intervals. Those are the first ones you learn. So C up to G, C up to E, or C up to D would be a major second, C up to E would be a major third, C up to A would be a major sixth, C up to B would be a major seventh. And if you take any of those intervals and lower that a half step, it's not diminished, it's different, it's minor, All right, so there's a vocabulary that you have to learn. If you have them, so like C to E flat, right, that's a minor third. If you lower that again, another half step, that's called a diminished third. So if you take a minor interval, lower it a half step, it becomes diminished, and that D would no longer be spelled as D, it would be E double flat. And I know this might seem nitpicky and kind of unnecessary and overly burdensome to learn, but I'm telling you, if you don't understand these things, you're never going to learn music. You're just not, okay? And you're not going to be able to read music, and you're going to get yourself into situations where you're constantly going to be confused and everything's going to be a mess, all right? And if you ever want to play a piece by Beethoven or a piece by Chopin or a piece by Mozart, or for that matter, you know, even jazz, right, or anything, but you'll notice in the scores, you'll see double sharps and double flats, and they're not there to piss you off, okay? They're there because they make sense, because we don't make music from notes, okay? We make music using intervals, okay? The relationship between two or more notes. So when I'm reading music, in general, I'm looking at the intervals. Is it a second? Is it a third? Is it a fourth? Is it a fifth? Or is it a sixth? That's how I'm going to determine the context of what I'm doing. But I'm showing you this particular type of tetrachord. We can call it, you know, we can call it a diminished fourth. We could call it a tritone. If you raise the perfect interval a half step, that's called augmented. But it's still the same idea, okay? If you have a perfect interval, if you lower it a half step, it becomes diminished. If you raise it a half step, it becomes augmented. So you could think of it as a augmented fourth. You could also think of it as a diminished fifth, F up to C flat, all right? However you want to think of it, I suppose, right? But that's the problem, that's the inherent problem with taking an octave and trying to slice it up into 12 semitones, which is what our system of music does, right? But if you want to make scales, you put these tetrachord groups together, and the tetrachord groups that we typically encounter are bound by perfect fourths, but not always. Again, sometimes they go, you could think of them as either going beyond that, which is the augmented fourth, or slightly contracted, the diminished fifth, all right? Because in that whole tone scale again, F, G, A, B, which is C flat, D flat, E flat, F. That's the only way we're going to reconcile those octaves. Otherwise, it's going to be F, G, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, and then, you know, that's clearly F up to E sharp is not an octave, okay? And it's a seventh, and you might call it an augmented seventh, I suppose, but it's still, it's going to be notated differently, and it's going to have a different function within the context of the music itself. Now, the other thing I'll just throw in quickly is this idea of, we're talking about symmetrical scale. So that's a symmetrical scale, the whole tone scale. The other symmetrical scale is the half step scale, which is all chromatic, all right, half steps, and that's the chromatic scale. All right, that's another symmetrical scale. That's all half steps, right? The other scale that's really interesting is the diminished scale, and diminished scale alternates whole step and half step, and you can build a diminished scale in several ways. You could think of it as two disjunct minor tetrachords a half step apart. So I'll show you what I mean. C, D, E flat, F, that's a minor tetrachord because the half step now is between 2 and 3. And the half step, here's the spelling, G flat, A flat, B flat, pardon me, G flat, A flat, you know what? I'm going to spell a different way because I think it's going to be easier. Actually, I'm just going to spell a different way, and I'm going to spell it as F sharp, G sharp, A, and B. Okay. All right, and then we'd end on the C. Now we got two Fs here, and that's kind of a problem because again, you know, typically I'm thinking of a scale as having going in alphabetical order, and there are no redundancies in terms of letter names. But there's our tetrachord. Okay, that's our minor tetrachord, two minor tetrachords. These are again, these are disjunct because they do not share the same note, and that's the diminished scale. And then we're ending on the C. If I spelled it another way, well, I could spell it. I could spell it G flat, A flat, B double flat, C flat. I could spell it G flat, A flat, B double flat, C flat. And again, C to C double flat is clearly not an octave. Okay, what is that? Well, an octave is a perfect interval, and when you lower it a half step, it becomes a diminished octave. And so C to C flat, you know, that kind of can, you know, make your head explode a little bit. So again, I'm just showing you the inherent problems in musical notation and why some thought has to be put into what you're doing. All right, but that's how you make a diminished scale. All right. Now, if I examine, as we did the previous scale, if I examine the intervals, all right, there's a fourth, all right. If I take the next two notes in the scale, that is, believe it or not, also a fourth. It looks like a major third. To most people, they would say D and they would say F sharp. D, and I wrote D, and F sharp, right? But I can't write F sharp. The better choice is the G flat. Why? Because that is a fourth. D, any kind of a D up to any kind of a G is a fourth, and that's what we're looking for. And it's these little packages of notes, these diminished fourth tetrachords. Okay, so this is a half step and a whole step and a half step. D, E flat, F, G flat. Now, if I go up again, that's a perfect fourth right there. E flat, F, G flat, A flat. That's a perfect fourth. And if I go up again, F, G flat, A flat, B double flat, if I'm spelling it that way, that's a diminished fourth. I could spell it E sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A. That's alphabetical. That would work. But you hear how this grouping of sound, that grouping of sound is very, very different, okay, than this grouping of sound. And you want to be able to go up the scale up and down the scale, right? You want to be able to have that facility. And it won't make sense otherwise. You'll start to, you know, when you're practicing at home, you want to have a clear head about what you're doing. And you don't just want to name notes willy-nilly. That's my point. Sometimes we have our back against the wall, you know, kind of painted into a corner. We're not really sure how to name a note or what to do with it. And I'm spending a lot of time on this because this is really like the weak link in the chain. This is our weak link in the learning chain. This is our weak link in the system. I'm kind of deliberately stress testing the idea of musical notation, and I'm kind of stress testing the limits of music theory to give you, to show you the importance of what I'm kind of calling musical linguistics, if in a sense. You know, where does this stuff come from? Why am I even using the word linguistics? I mean, like, it's a language, but it has a kind of an etymology. It has a source of where it came from. where did music come from? Well, it came from nature. Okay, it's based from nature, from the overtone series. We hear sounds in nature all the time with birds and whales, and it was just a beautiful program on public television about birds where they recorded whales and they sped up the whale sounds and it sounded like birds. Same song in a different octave, maybe? By the way, no scientific definition of a song, according to this documentary, which is quite interesting. Is there a scientific definition of a scientist? I guess there is. Also, no scientific definition of beauty. Although the scientists' contention is that the birds sing because they want to be portrayed as beautiful so they can mate. I mean, nature wants to be beautiful for its own sake and wants to be beautiful in order to relate to nature. It's really fascinating. In fact, I would apply a similar thing to music. You know, the reason you learn a musical instrument is to inculcate a sense of beauty in your life. Just play one note on the piano. It's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful sound. Even if the piano's out of tune or old or whatever, a real musical sound of, strumming on a guitar, it's something that just reaches us in a way that nothing else really does. And then out of that, yeah, we have songs and we have lessons and all of that. But it's so important now in our world to do things that are beautiful and that move us, right? Because there are very few things in the newspapers and that the word beauty just doesn't come up a whole lot. And I don't consider Botox to be beautiful, okay, or plastic surgery. That's not the kind of beauty I'm talking about. But just the word beauty, what does it mean? To smell a rose, all of those things. Okay, I threw out a lot of stuff today, and I did it deliberately because I wanted to give you a lot of things to think about. And I don't want to discourage you. So if you have questions, please let me know, and just contact me either through my YouTube channel or through my website. Go to thepianolessons.com. Let me know what you think. Okay, you guys have a great week, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye for now. I'm Jonathan Eder. This is The Piano Lesson.